Welcome to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. Today we're going to get into what it means to be accountable. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about our last episode on rewards and what you'll expect on all these episodes going forward. Because on the rewards episode, we talked about some very specific family things. And people are going to think I'm weird with some of the reward systems that I use and do for myself. Do you find some of it weird, Mel?
Well, I suppose I'm more used to it, but it does seem a bit more extreme, even than I do.
But like the last episode, we teach a concept and then we give examples from our life. So in the last episode, the concept was consider giving different rewards aligned with your family's values. Now we gave some examples, and mine are a little bit wild of the rewards that I give, but it's just a different mindset and different approach. But the concept is still the same. Give your reward system some thought to see if it's really instilling and helping them instilling values and going in the direction that you think is important for your family. And today's episode is going to be a lot of the same, but before we do, because I am not a great podcaster, Mel, I almost forgot, you can read us in case people are dropping in and this is their first episode.
Sure. Welcome back to the Strong Family Project podcast, where we guide you on the path to raising independent, confident, and resilient children in a strong family environment.
And the reason why we need to remember to say that is because you've been doing a great job with sharing these episodes. We're 10 days into the podcast. We're over 2,000 downloads. We've broken to the top 100 parenting podcasts right off the bat. And when you share the episodes, people can drop in on any single episode for their first one. And so we want to make sure we repeat those and repeat our teaching tool, which is this. When you hear something valuable, press pause, write it down, and then drop us a comment with what it was. While you're over there, do give the podcast a review and share the episode. You can share it on social media. You can email it to some buddies, whatever you're comfortable with. But that really helps us grow and continue to invest in teaching these parenting lessons, and family lessons is probably a more appropriate way to call them. Agreed?
I do agree.
Okay. That was a long breath so I could let you say something.
Well, I guess I thought you were going to start with your example, and then
I know. Mel's in the zone. She doesn't like the podcast banter, which I understand, but this is a full 30-minute episode.
But see, I like hearing the banter, but I feel like it comes up for us later.
Banter with myself? Okay. So to continue the banter, we have a family core value that is be accountable. It is one of our foundational ones. Now, you might not pick it as your family core value. However, it is still a value that is important for families and kids. It'll save a lot of headaches, and it'll save a lot of drama, pointing fingers, who did what. It just nip in the bud and let's move forward and use it as a teachable moment. And being accountable is key for when something goes wrong, owning up for it, and then you can immediately work towards how we're going to make it right. What's the person's contribution going to be? You gave the example with relationships and taking the mom out to dinner on a previous episode, because that's what that family held was important as, I don't want to call it a punishment. What's a better word for it?
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not a punishment. I think it's an opportunity to make things better. We use the phrase make it better or make it right. So it's an opportunity. If you look at it as a punishment, you're walking away with a negative feeling about it. But the goal really is to make things better and, improve the relationship. But like you said a second ago, the goal here with the kids really, and for us too, is to be able to always identify our piece in the matter. Maybe you were the main person to blame, but sometimes it's not so clear. But if you really try to see, well, which piece of this was my fault, or which piece did I contribute? That's a really important mindset to be able to have, to not always want to point the finger.
Yeah, let's get into an example. So I got a text from my buddy this week, and I'll redact the names for this one for his sake. I did get his approval to share the story, though. His daughter was at school and on the playground, where it seems like everything goes wrong.
Recess is just...
Every story that our kids come home with, recess is always the foundational thing they talk about, and where they probably learn the most. I mean, not talking academics, but interpersonal skills, and you got to keep a close eye on that recess, Mel.
It's like a microcosm for life.
It's like a little bit of Lord of the Flies. You get to just go out there and be for 30 minutes and see what happens, and then they reel back in, which is good. And so his daughter, fifth grader, is out at recess, and there's a boy throwing a football and hitting kids. And so she went up and told him to stop. Again, a little verbal dispute, as kids will do, and she kicked him in the shin. And this is both sides of the story. Both parents agree this is how it happened. And so the boy walks away. A few minutes later, he comes up and slaps her across the face. And my buddy is pretty upset about this when she gets home, and the school really doesn't seem to do much with it. And so his 5th grade daughter got struck across the face by a classmate, 5th grade boy, and he was furious about it. I think furious is the right word. And he's not quite sure what to do, because he's not like a, Papa Bear coming storming in, but want to make the situation right. So he wants to address it with the other father. And so this other father is not strong with the core value of being accountable. And so, well, we'll bring him over and apologize, but we are going on vacation, and he does need his sleep, and like excuse central from the dad, whose son struck my buddy's daughter. And so eventually they're like, well, he's got to go to sleep. We're going to go to Hawaii in the morning, like all these weird things to try to dodge accountability for this little thing that happened that could be an amazing teachable moment. I'm redacting the names because I'm not picking on any kids or families or parents, but you have to learn from situations. So you need to explain what happened. And so this person is coming up with tons of excuses to dodge accountability. And if you're a real person, I don't want to cuss on this podcast, Mel, but if you're real, when people are tap dancing around accountability, it comes off as super weak. And so he had his son write a letter instead of go over and apologize. And I will read the letter to you. Again, not picking on a 5th grader, but this is a perfect example of how not to be accountable. Dear so-and-so, sorry for slapping you in the face. I didn't mean to throw the ball at your friend. I meant for it to be a joke. I understand you're sticking up for your friend, but next time, please don't kick me. I know what I did was wrong. Hope you feel better. From, and then the kid's name. So just reading that and having accountability as a core value makes my skin crawl. This is excuse central weakness. And before I get too fired up, I want to pass it over to you, Mel, before I get all, I said I'm not going to cuss on this family podcast, and I don't usually, but stuff like this, sometimes there's some power words. Go ahead.
I'll give you a minute to take some deep breaths. One of the main things that comes to me with this is the fact that it was a handwritten letter and not in person. I think in this day and age, it's much easier to not have to face the person that you have done something to. And here was an opportunity where they could have come over. The kid could have lost a little sleep, whatever. But having that in-person interaction would have gone very differently than this letter was. So I think to encourage our kids, and we try to do this with ours, to always have the interaction happen in person if it's possible. So that's the first thing that struck me, was like they took that out of the equation, which made it real easy for that kid because he doesn't have to face her. He doesn't have to look at her. He doesn't have to see her reaction. And that struck me initially. I know that's chock full of excuses as well about himself being the victim, but that's the first thing that stuck out to me, because that makes my skin crawl when kids just text each other and don't have in-person conversations.
Yes, this is definitely a check the box, like, oh, I did apologize, but it's not really an apology because it's full of excuses. And so when you apologize to someone or teach your kids how to apologize to someone, or you're accepting apology from someone, when they throw in the reason why they did it, it's just weak, soft nonsense, for the lack of a better word. So here's where I'm picking it apart. Okay, sorry for slapping you in the face. Good start. I didn't mean to throw the ball at you. BS. What, did your arm wind up and just the ball went flying out and struck 3 children on 3 different like, oh, okay. That is a huge child excuse that every parent needs to nip in the bud. I didn't mean to. Yeah. Well, you did it. Like, it happened, and you probably did mean to. Now, you might not have meant to have the outcome of hurting them, but you lacked the ability to see it through. And kids do lack that ability. And if you let them get off the hook, they'll never learn that ability. So this is a huge teachable moment. They don't see the possible consequences of their actions, so they do it. I do believe they probably didn't mean to hurt somebody with it, but was probably just looking for intention, but he did intend to throw it. Like whenever I throw a football at 3 people, it's on purpose. Yeah. So I understand sticking up for your friend, but next time, please don't kick me.
Well, the word but is always, that's a tricky one, I think, because they're just turning the focus back to them and they're not really taking responsibility for their actions.
This is back to like teaching concepts and examples. This is a core concept. Don't use the word but when you're trying to say something. It devalues whatever you said in the first half of the sentence. It's human psychology. So if I say, thank you for listening to the podcast, but I wish you shared more. Well, I just devalued my gratitude for listening to the podcast, because of what I really wanted to get to was the second half of the sentence. Like, oh, but this is what I really want. And it's just a weak way of speaking. And you'll listen to the podcast and my vernacular will screw up with it, but it's a core concept. I just used it because I wanted to excuse my poor use of vernacular. And it's a core concept to try to practice. And so that, I guess that's a good example. You literally heard me just screw it up right there because I wanted to kind of excuse away the mistake and get to the reason. So listen for it in your conversations. How often do you use it? And it's a communication skill, not just for apologies. In most communications, you don't want to use the word but because you're devaluing whatever you said first, and everyone knows it when it comes out. I use it and I know it.
Well, I remember when you brought this up to me, I think I said something and I used but, and then you were like, I read something where you're supposed to change it to and. So I tried it and I'm like, that's so weird. But that's because I'm not used to it. But then once I started doing it, or I'll even have the kids repeat something they said with the word and, it really changes. You're right. It gives the first part of what you're saying value as well. It was just interesting because initially it's like, that sounds really strange. Well, let's say, what if you change that to and in there? Does it make a difference? I know he's still excusing it, but.
I understand for sticking up for your friend, and next time, please don't kick me.
I mean, it's still not great, but it doesn't make you just devalue the first part. I think when you say but, like you said, it kind of lets you get to your point and not really emphasize the beginning, which was the more important part.
We are both a work of progress with it.
Oh yeah.
Now I am going to. I'm saying that so I don't focus on not saying it for the rest of the podcast, so I can focus on teaching the concept. There's one more nuance in here that is a core concept. I don't think anyone would have picked it up because I was reading it kind of fast. That last line, hope you feel better, from, and then the kid's name. When you don't use the word I, you are distancing yourself from the sentence. It doesn't say, I hope you feel better. Just hope you feel better. That's different. When you say, love you to your kids, that's different than I love you. There's a very powerful communication skill in there. And he's learning from his parents who allowed him to write this letter. I guess he wrote it with his mom, sent it to my buddy. My buddy took a picture and texted to his dad, like, what is this? Like, this is not a real. And I won't go down that story any further. However, the lessons are, you have to be accountable without excuses. Try not to use the word but, which is an important concept and tactic. And when you avoid using the word I, you're distancing yourself from the rest of the sentence. And other people know it.
Well, I think this is a good lead into how we apologize in our family. So the first piece really is you have to be in person and look them in the eye. So it needs to be, which is obviously easier when we're home. But I think that's an important thing to remember is when possible, even if it's slightly uncomfortable or inconvenient.
Well, I think because it's uncomfortable and inconvenient.
That's why you should do it.
Yes.
Yes. And secondly, the apology needs to be sincere. So sometimes this might mean a few minutes apart to calm down so you can truly be sincere. So I think what a lot of people hear and do is just like, sorry, and then you kind of walk away. Or it's yelled across the room. And again, if you just say sorry, you're not saying I am sorry. So it devalues it. You're not taking true responsibility. And we used to certainly do that. Go apologize to your brother for kicking him. Hey, sorry, Henry. And then just walk away. And I thought to myself, that's not enough. It's not enough to just say sorry. So we came up with this process, 3-step process. First, you say, I'm sorry. So you're saying the I part. And then you have to say exactly what you're sorry for. Because sometimes even that can be confusing. Someone might think, well, I'm not upset for you about that. I'm upset about this thing. So we have to make sure the person is very clear what they're sorry for. I'm sorry for kicking you. I'm sorry for taking your toy without asking. It needs to be very specific, and that allows the person apologizing to be accountable for their exact action. And it also allows the person receiving the apology to clarify maybe that wasn't the thing that they were really upset about. So those two things are important. And then the third piece that we added, so we don't stop there. We don't stop at just, I'm sorry, and then for whatever it is. We take it a step further to say, how can I help? And that's very important. So sometimes it might be something like, I'd like a hug. Sometimes it might be, don't ever kick me again, or draw me a picture, or whatever. But it allows the person receiving the apology to ask for some, what is that word? Like something to resolve the issue, some closure about it. And sometimes it's something really small, and it doesn't have to be big. And sometimes kids might try to make it ridiculous, like give me all your Halloween candy or something. So there has to obviously be reason with this. But those 3 steps, I'm sorry for kicking you or whatever, and then how can I help? And then that person has to wait for that person to tell them. It's very easy, and because it's uncomfortable, to try to rush through it real quick. So I certainly have had my kids repeat the apology. Because I'm like, that didn't sound sincere, or you said it too fast. You need to do it again, and you need to mean it. You need to look that person in the eye.
You can even throw in a little, okay, well, this didn't go as well as it should have. We're going to try again later tonight. Sometimes you have to remove the emotions, and you said that earlier, but I want to make sure that's part of it. In the heat of the moment, that's why we have family meetings, because we got to kick emotional things to a time and place where we can talk about them logically. Same with apologies. Hey, it feels like this isn't going well, and it feels like it's not sincere right now. Let's take 10. Let's take 20. Let's take 2 hours. It doesn't matter. However, you're going to get it right by the end of the day, and that is the standard to hold.
I love that. The other thing that I wrote down when I was thinking about our topic today was, we don't say, I mentioned this earlier, but we don't necessarily say go apologize. We say make it better. You need to go make it better. You need to go make it right. Because again, it gives it a positive spin, and it gives them a bit of control. I have the power to make this better. I have the power to bring this relationship back and improve it. So I like using that much better than go apologize, because it just sounds negative. So I like to spin things positive as much as possible and make it better, make it right. I think at one point we had made Logan like a little keychain on his backpack that just said make it right, just so he could focus throughout the day on making right choices.
Great job teaching the concept. I'm not going to interject too much. Do you have an example from our lives that you can apply to that?
Well, you know what just occurred to me? It's not an example really, but I think it's really important too for the kids to see us apologize to each other. And I'm trying to think of like, it's not always in front of them, but I try to apply this concept to the parents as well. Because like we talked about the relationship podcast before, I think that was podcast 7, about how it's important for all the relationships in the family to work together. It's really important for us, for the kids to see us work through problems and us apologize to each other. So if I'm a little snippy with you for something at dinner, I might later on apologize for that in front of them so they can see that working in action. But as for an example, besides the kicking, don't kick me. A big one that happens here, honestly, and I think I mentioned it, is a toy being taken without permission. And that's a bit, like that's one that we often do. I'm sorry for taking your toy without asking, how can I help? And sometimes it might be, hey, you can't play with that toy because you didn't ask. So you have a real world consequence for your behavior. I'm trying to think of not a better one, but.
Well, while you think of it, I'll tell more of examples of it gone wrong.
Okay.
But from the real world. So Mel and I were going for a walk the other day, and this lady comes by with some dogs off the leash. And they walk by us, and one of the dogs turns, runs up, bites me in the ankle, rips my pant leg. This lady had no concept of how to be accountable and apologize. She just went into panic mode. And she's like scooping up these dogs and like running back in her house, which was a block away. We were on a public road. She had the dogs off leash. And all she started spouting was excuses. She could not think clearly. Like, I can't believe that happened. That's never happened before. And like, he's not like that. Like, why are you telling me this? I don't care if your dog has, to your knowledge, not like it just happened. My pants have ripped and have a hole in it because you decided to leave your dogs off the leash against the rules because you thought you had under control, and you do not, and you don't have your emotions under control. You went into full meltdown mode. So the dog rips the pant leg, and like we keep walking. I thought, you know what? She did such a poor job apologizing. I'm going to go back to her house. I want to talk to her. Right, Mel?
Yes, I felt very uncomfortable.
So we go back over to the house.
Yep.
And this lady's in full panic mode, and I'm a bigger individual, so I don't go up on the porch. I don't want to make her feel threatened or anything like that, because I don't think she had I don't want to say intellectual ability, the correct framework, mental framework to handle the situation. She had not been taught it. It had not been enforced in her family. She's probably 50 and just had no idea how to handle a tough situation where she was clearly at fault. And so I stood back in the road and just called for her to come out. She came out, and she came back with apologies. And she said the craziest things I've ever heard in my life. Mel, do you remember?
I'm trying to figure out what happened, as if she's talking to her dogs about what happened.
She's got this dog in for interrogation on the inside. I'm trying to talk to him to figure out what happened. Do you really expect me to buy your apology of you trying to talk to a dog to get the answer of why it bit me under your control? And so she had no answer. She said, just let me know how much the pants cost and leave it in my mailbox, and like rushed inside and closed the door.
Mm-hmm. That's how it went down.
Got to 50. Had no idea how to handle a stressful situation that they were at fault for, to own it, to make it right. And then these situations are actually relationship builders when you do it correctly. They're relationship destroyers when you do it wrong. There's a lot on the line with a good apology.
I agree. That was a really, really good example. Because I think we were both in shock that she didn't know how to apologize or how to just take responsibility. And this has been an issue for us here with dogs. There's been several times where that was only bite, but there's several times where a dog will start barking or run up to us and be off the leash. And some people will be like, I'm sorry. And they kind of come get their dog. Others kind of like call for the dog weekly and like hope they come over to them. Like, it's very strange.
I need to give him a talking to and teach him some lessons about the local ordinances and how they should handle stressful situations.
Yeah.
And Mel can attest, I do it in a perfectly calm voice.
Well, didn't you email the sheriff's office to see what you could and couldn't do?
Well, they were too aggressive. They're like, well, you can attack. You can, yeah. Well, I want to know what the rules were.
But that's what I'm saying. You want to know what your limits are.
I want to get clarity on the situation, because a lot of times with these kind of muddy waters, like, what is right and wrong? Am I in the wrong? The last podcast we said, the first question you ask yourself is, am I sure I'm right? Well, I want to make sure I was right. So when those tourists come over with their dogs off the leash and they think it's cool to, like, a huge dog person, dog runs up aggressively barking. We're getting off topic here, but they need to be corrected. The adult.
Yep.
When your kid slaps someone, well, it's a teachable moment. And this dad from the example earlier, blew it. This kid can grow up, unfortunately, to have a weak concept of what an apology is, and is truly, definitely not sorry for what he did.
And I think a big piece of why we had a whole podcast about this is it is an opportunity. I think we try to have a mindset with a lot of things about it being an opportunity for kids to grow, for relationships to grow, and not let things fester. It needs to be kind of brought out in the open. The other thing I forgot was, once the apology is sincere and done, it can't be brought up and used against you. Like, it needs to be forgotten. It needs to, not forgotten necessarily, but it needs to not be brought up again to make the person feel bad. So that's something that's important too. 'Cause I think kids can be good about that. Oh, remember that one time? Well, no, we're through that. We're past that. They apologized. They took the responsibility and hopefully made better choices moving forward.
I'm going to wait for you to choose a family example. I'm going to give another example.
Okay.
You focus on your coming up with an example for the family. I mentioned earlier that a good apology can be a big relationship builder. We have a house that's in a short-term rental property. We did a long-term rental. Did not care for that when things went south with COVID. People just stopped paying their rent. So we switched to a short-term non-lease rental option for one of our businesses. Anyways, We had some garbage, bear got in it, threw it all over the road. A neighbor called, all fired up, and rightfully so. I didn't go and make a ton of apologies. I didn't say, well, it's bear season, like bears will be out. Like I said, I'm so sorry. This is completely my fault. I drove over there that day. It was 40, 50 miles away. I cleaned it all up and cleaned up other people's garbage that was out on the road at the same time. Went up to the property owner and said, this was completely my fault. My apologies. I didn't say, but the bears are out, but animals getting garbage. We live in Colorado. Like this happens. Like I didn't do any of that weak stuff. And later on, they were thinking about getting rid of short-term rentals, and that person stood up on my behalf and said, well, Joe actually has been a huge attribute to the community, and then shared that story where I was accountable for what happened at that property. Made no excuses, went and made it right, built a relationship, and a stronger relationship out of it.
Okay, I thought of one. So when we moved here, there was a little statue of St. Francis of Assisi out front. And it was kind of partially broken, but not fully. And I really liked it. So I left it out there. And then one day, maybe like a year later, I look outside and it's like busted into little pieces. And my sweet little Everett, he's like, Logan did that. And I was like, really? I'm like so surprised because I thought I specifically said to leave that alone. So I brought it up to Logan. Said, no, can you please help me understand what happened with this statue? And he explained to me that he had the impression that I had said it's okay to break it because it was already partially broken. So instead of getting all fired up, I see that it was a misunderstanding. I'm still obviously upset, and I still think I deserve an apology for that. And he did apologize. And when he asked me how he can help, I said, I need you to go out there and pick every single piece up and throw it away. And we also had the opportunity to talk about miscommunications. So this was an opportunity where he made it better by cleaning it up and apologizing. But we also both learned that we need to be careful about miscommunications. I very well might have just not remembered saying that. I'm not going to say that I'm totally in the right, but I think we need to make sure that we're more clear about what we expect. So sometimes when kids make mistakes or we make mistakes, it can be because we didn't know or we were misunderstanding the communication or what was expected. So it was a learning opportunity from the standpoint of apologizing and making it better, but also we both grew closer and we both realized we might need to make sure that our communications are clear.
Great example, Mel. I'm glad we
So
gave
I was
you
really
some time
under
to
pressure.
think about
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
Let me recap here. We'll land the airplane on this episode. So being accountable is important, whether it's your core value, not a core value. It is a value that can serve you and your family in their lives. We went over how we can practice that in our daily life. Mel shared her questions. Mel, read off the questions for us one time.
You say, I'm sorry for, and you're very specific with what you say you're sorry for, and then you ask, how can I help?
We also went over why that's a tactic with some examples. We went over the tactic of not saying but when you're giving your answers to those questions, and the power of attaching yourself to statements by using the word I in those statements. So you've got a lot of concepts, you've got a lot of tactics to apply, and you've had some examples that I navigated without getting too fired up. It was like a 4 out of 10.
Yeah, I would say so. And I want to add, though, to be direct. So we had talked about how this incident with your first example was in the school, and things can be resolved in school, but I think sometimes it's also important to be direct with families, with parents, and just being in person for apologies. I think that's important.
Yeah, it should have been addressed between the parents immediately. And now it's festering. Now school get involved. Now the parents it's just spiraling out of control when a little bit of accountability would have went a long way right away. Your default reaction should be accountable. Plenty more to talk on this topic on, well, what if it's like kind of my fault? Like, should I be fully accountable? We can talk on that on another episode. And also we've gone over the value of being accountable, the value of apologizing, how to do it. And that's not all when it comes to parenting. We're going to have some more episodes on this because after the how, the next thing is how do I stay calm in a situation like this? What are the tactics that I can use as a parent or child to not go fly off the handle when things go wrong? part of it's have the structure, but what are some tactics to control that? And that's got to be another episode. So Mel, I want to thank you for those who are watching on YouTube. Mel dressed up for this episode. Sweater and jeans. Looking
Jeans
sharp.
are dressing up in our home.
Yeah, very professional.
Thank
yeah,
you.
Mel shows up in sweater and jeans because like, we going to church today? Is it Easter? Oh, like, what's going on here? Who's coming over? Mel, what are your last thoughts on apologizing?
I think it's important to lead by example. So we want to teach these concepts to our children, but at the end of the day, we need to lead by doing them ourselves.
Yep. Use these tactics, create a standard, hold the standard. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Strong Family Project podcast. Get over to the website at strongfamilyproject.com where you can download the 7 steps of the path for free and get started on your family's core values and your family meetings and all the critical elements that we have laid out for you there. Talk to you on the next episode.